with that style of column, a notes column. And that's been in Boston. That's continued being a tradition, for decades now, like 4 or 5 decades. And that was each sport would have a specific notes columnist, and that would be the Sunday paper. And they still do it, but it's not the same now. Now we get the news too quick. So by the time you read it on Sunday, you've already read it on 4 or 5, internet outlets.
So Frank, how many years were you with the Press-Telegram?
Well, when I was, I think I was a junior in high school when I flunked chemistry at Gar High the first semester, and my counselor called me in and said, you're going to have to get another elective. And he kind of was going through the catalog, and he goes, well, journalism, that's like newspapers, right? So, well, was that what he said? Well, you learn how to write paragraphs, how to do stories, and stuff like that, and you write for the school paper. I go, well, would I get to write about sports? Because, obviously I was going up to play baseball and basketball and just, like everybody else who grew up in L.A. at that time in Southern California, you grew up listening to Chick Hearn and Ben Scully, go to bed at night and lay in bed listening to the game. So I would read all the papers, then the Times and the Herald and then the Independent Press-Telegram. I would literally read every paper. So I said, sure. So I took journalism, and then my my journalism advisor, who was also my English composition teacher, back then, newspapers would write to the local high school to say, hey, we need some part-timers to help us with high school coverage and to take scores and fishing facts. And I was already working for some of the local throwaway papers, covering little high school games. I remember they paid me 25 cents a column inch, which, in other words, if you took a pike and pole or a ruler and you measured the length, it'd always be like 2 paragraphs would be an inch, 2 or 3 paragraphs. So I would get 25 cents. So I'd write this long stories. I remember here's a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid, and they'd give me like a check for $4 for writing like 3 or 4 stories. So I did that, and then the Independent Press-Telegram called, and the prep editor, called me in and interviewed me. And I was like one of, I think literally, because there was so many games they covered and they had so much space, we would literally cover 15, 16, 17 high school football games on a Friday night and 8 or 9 basketball games in basketball season. So I was one of the kids who would go out and cover prep high school games or take scores over the phone or whatever. I think initially there was like 13, 14 that worked, one day a week with me, and then ultimately, they kind of fell by the wayside or, went on to other things, and I just kind of hung with it. So I started the Press-Telegram when I was 18, went to the Register about 23 years later for 2.5 years, went to Fox Sports for 3 years. Didn't want to move when Fox Sports laid off about 30 people. I didn't want to move to Milwaukee or Cincinnati or a place like that. So something opened up at the Press-Telegram, and hey, you want to come back? So I went back there 7, 8 years, and then left there 2 years ago when they started, collapsing and all that, and just decided to go into basketball stuff full time. So now I have a scouting service and have my own website and do a lot of some freelance writing type stuff. Lindy's magazine, I'll do all the preseason college basketball stuff, things like that. But it's still, like my wife, I think it's from my wife, she says, why do something you don't want to do where you're covering or write about things you're not interested in? Just basketball is what makes you happy, so just do that. So God bless her. Second time was a charm,
Now, for those of you players out there that are a little bit confused, a newspaper is the way that we used to get all the news and information up until about the mid-'90s.
Yeah.
It's kind of like ESPN.com before the internet was there.
That's right.
That must have been newspapers.
That must have been fun covering all those games before the internet, because you would have to actually go to the games and watch them, and then not only that, but you'd have to rely on people.
And Mike would agree with this because he's in publishing and he understands writing and what. And it's just not the sports, but I think any of politics or any time there's some tragedy of any of the shootings or stuff or controversial stuff. I mean, you'll go 3 or 4 hours watching CNN or MSNBC or reading the tweets or reading the blogs, and you'll get 14 reports that all prove false or rush to judgment or whatever. The newspaper days, where it was just when the newspapers other than maybe the TV stations, where you relied on them on your news, you would get veteran, skilled reporters who were very impartial, very, very astute, very, very calm, who understood the basic principles of good reporting and unbiased reporting. You'd have 7-8 hours. If a story broke, in the early afternoon, you'd have 7-8 hours to work on that story, investigate it, get all the facts, get all the different angles, and write a very balanced story. Nowadays, guys are in such a hurry to tweet it first, to get it on their website first, that they'll take some half-assed source or, something that's very unreliable and go with it. Then later, later you correct yourself or you just pull it off your website and people don't even realize it. So again, there's a lot of misinformation that goes out before the real story kind of eventually sorts itself out. And that's, like the great example is, the Boston Marathon bombing, where people were reporting, Al Qaeda was coming to Boston or whatnot. And then ultimately the entity that did the best balanced, most accurate job of reporting it in a very methodical way was, the Boston Globe, with their old style reporters who were, had great sources and were methodical and knew where to turn to get the real facts.
Well, Frank, you make a great point, and I want to. You've touched on a few things I want to talk about. I want to talk about what you're doing now, and I want to, talk about your current venture, Burleson on Basketball, which our listeners can find at www.burlesononbasketball.com, and it's BURLISON. So that's out there. But you talked about when you started writing, you were just in high school and you were covering these games, sort of, I guess, as a a part-time freelance, student sort of writer stringer. So you were what, 16, 17 years old?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you think that. I remember, I think the first year that I covered some CIF playoff games. And here's you want to feel old. I feel old. I covered Paramount versus Inglewood in 1974, second round 3A game at Cerritos College. 6'5" sophomore for Inglewood, Reggie Theus.
That's dating yourself right there.
Paramount were the two standouts for Paramount. Where do you hear this name? Were brothers, Kevin and I think Kevin and Kenny. You know what their last name was? They went to Paramount High School. Their last name was Korver. It was Kyle Korver's dad and uncle.
Is that right? That's a great story.
And Reggie Theus, who now the coach at Northridge, was I think a junior. He might have been a junior. I think he was a junior. Yeah, he was 6'5" with that afro, going to literally seemed to cover half the court, playing guard. But Stanley Stewart was the two guard he was passing to.
And he was a beast at Crenshaw back then too.
Inglewood. Okay, so Frank, let's you've got so much stuff here, and I've got a lot of balls in the air I want to talk about, but I'm going to have to go here for a minute because I had this discussion. Reggie Theus's name came up a while back on the air. We had someone call in and say, who was the best high school, and Frank, I'm going to pin people down like I do, best high school player that has played in Southern California in 50 years. So obviously,
Mike, I tend not to, you hear so many legendary, like Bill Walton. I saw him play a ton at UCLA, on TV with Dick Ehrenberg doing the replays at night on Channel 5 and a few games in person. But I never actually saw him as a high school player. Now, a lot of old timers. I remember Ron Palmer, longtime coach at Long Beach Poly, who's been retired now 10, 11 years. But he was an assistant at Pasadena High to George Turgeon.
He was George Turgeon's assistant. That's right.
Yeah, he was George Turgeon at Pasadena, another legendary coach. And they actually, in the old Covina tournament, and this is, people go, Covina tournament. Well, that used to be like pretty much the, tournament of champions. Got started in the late mid-'70s, but the Covina tournament was like a big tournament. It was like a 32-team, I think, post-Christmas tournament. And then you'd actually have which was a rarity for those days. But you'd have teams come up from San Diego, a few LA City teams, maybe an occasional team from Northern California. But I heard Coach Palmer said that they had a team that eventually either won CIF or I think they won CIF or with the semis, but they played Helix High, and Helix beat them like a drum at 35 points. And of course, it was Bill Walton with the La Mesa High Helix High School in San Diego County. And Palmer said the guy was just absurd how good he was at that level. And of course, people will remember when he was relatively healthy at UCLA. Before, he still was a very good professional player, but he was kind of probably just a shell of what he might have been if he would have been healthy. But they just talked about the sheer overwhelming dominance that he had as a high school, and of course as a 88 consecutive wins or whatever that he was part of at UCLA before they lost to Notre Dame in that January of 1974 in South Bend that game.
Yeah. Now I'm going to tell you though, Reggie Theus's name came up in the discussion that we had as one of the as a possible candidate for the best high school player in Southern California all time. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here, Frank, and I'm gonna just say who I think it is, and I'm gonna really be interested in your thoughts on this, because you've seen a lot of high school basketball, and I'm not gonna date you, but for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go with Raymond Lewis.
Yeah, and you know what, Mike? I mean, it's to the point where so many people talk about Raymond Lewis now, about, he's the greatest ever. And you realize, you're 30 years old. You couldn't have seen him play, or you're 20, but he's almost become as much mythology as he was player. But as you remember, Mike, remember when we'd go to Cal State LA and they'd have the Summer Pro League, and you'd see him when he was still 24, 25, where he was still in relatively good shape, and would go to a camp and not laugh or whatnot. But he was at the peak of his game, and he'd be playing against guys who were good NBA players at the time, like Paul Westphal is a good example, and Freeman Williams and Matt, all these guys, and he would just destroy him. I mean, he and George Turgeon, who coached him in high school at Urban May, and later went on to be an assistant Carcanian at
George McCorrin. George McCorrin.
George McCorrin.
Yep.
Yeah. George said, and he made a big point. I saw him, he hasn't been coached for, but he goes, you know what? These days, Raymond Lewis was probably Allen Iverson before Allen Iverson, and maybe even a better, more consistent outside shot. But again, those days, guys who were a little bit rebellious or didn't fit into the cookie cutter mold of what a player was supposed to do and act almost in a subservient fashion to ownership. He wasn't that way, and it was kind of semi-blackballed because he was just, you just don't do that. But these days, that's the norm, and he would just be considered, a little bit strong-minded. He probably would. In this area, he'd probably have a 12, 15-year career and be an all-star every once in a while.
Yeah, no question. Now the thing is, I'm going on Coach Gorgon, who I really respect, because I graduated from Crescenta Valley High School.
Yeah,
and Coach Gorgon always took a lot of time with me, late in my coaching career, and we'd talk every time we got together, and he said that. Well, do you remember the game Crescenta Valley against Verbunday in the CIF championship game when Crescenta Valley
71? Yeah, the 4A championship at the Long Beach at the LA Sports Arena. Yeah,
right.
71.
And Crescenta Valley was undefeated, right?
Yeah.
And Verbunday and Raymond Lewis just kicked their ass.
Yeah.
Like he said earlier, I'm 41 and I didn't really get the chance to see Raymond Lewis play, but it was still like mythical. It's like somebody you just always heard about over the years, and it was just grown in Paul Bunyan.
And it's funny, I don't know what you think, Mike, because I think you're a little bit younger than I am, but you remember, I often think, when you're younger, certain things leave an impression on you, and then the older you get, you look back on it fondly, and maybe if I'd see it in nowadays, I'd say, well, God, he gambled defensively, or he took bad shots, or, certain things that I would nitpick him for now because I was just too naive and really didn't know as much as I think I know now then. But in terms of a guy who just, he was like one of these guys, if you think back to the 90s, and you would remember, Mike, seeing Jason Kidd, even his 2 years in the conference. I mean, that was a time when they had great guards like, Kaya said he was a very good point guard at UCLA, and Stoudemire and KJ and guys like that. He literally physically and emotionally intimidated really, really good players. That's how physically dominant Jason Kidd was. Well,
Yes.
Raymond Lewis, I think, was the same way. I mean, in high school, he was legendary. By the time he was a sophomore, he had become a legend.
Yeah.
And again,
No question.
The fact that we're still talking about him, 12, 13 years after he's been dead, and probably 30
some odd years after he played.
when he last really played decent basketball in any kind of pickup game or whatever. It's almost like John Wooden. John Wooden's almost become more legendary 38 years after he coached a game and 3 years after he died than when he was a coach.
No question. That's a great,
Yeah, I think.
Frank, that's a great observation. And I want to talk about Jason Kidd now that you brought him up. Chris Maxwell, who's across from me, I don't know, people are watching this live stream on our website, or if they're listening, some people listen on their phones, their iPhones when they're driving. But Chris started for me, Frank, on my first state championship team. And we won our state championship in the Oakland Coliseum. And the game after us, Jason Kidd.
No, actually, that was the game the next night.
Oh, the game the next night.
Right.
Well,
Me and you stayed. Most of everybody else went home, but I had family up there, so I stayed the next night, and you stayed also, and we went to go watch their game the next night.
So Jason Kidd crushed Fremont of L.A.
Oh, yeah. The Chris Ford, Michael Tate team, right?
Yeah.
Michael Tate, yep.
Crushed them.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right, Frank. Just physically dominated. He was like punking these guys.
Yeah.
And the crazy part, I'd argue that he wasn't even the best player on this team, and he was still intimidating everybody because they had like a 6'7" forward that was I thought at the time was a little bit better. But he was just like Coach said. It was just crazy how he was just like playing men among boys.
That's right.
He always, even from the time he was a ninth grader or 10th grader or whatever, be it, at the tournaments in Vegas or Nike camp when he first started going to the Nike camp, or, a little bit in the NBA, certainly, but definitely in college. You were always on your heels against him, be it because he was always just driving it right down your throats. And if you tried to take a charge, if you tried to move your feet, he'd go right by you. If you weren't move your feet, he'd get an angle on you. The amazing thing is that he had as much success as he did, and literally be, what would you gauge him? Gauge him from being a very bad to a subpar. At his best, he was probably a subpar jump shooter. But here's a guy who was an all-star, shooting 38% from the field and probably, 25% on threes.
And he didn't get a jump shot until late in his career. I want to say within the last 2 or 3 years of his career.
Bob Tate, Frank, who's an old friend of yours and mine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Bob Tate was Jason Kidd's shooting coach in the NBA. Did you know that?
Yeah, he's actually coached a lot of guys as a shooting coach.
Yeah, Bob. Bob.
Niche, yeah.
Bob Tate used to, and I watched Bob do the shooting. The year I spent with the Lakers, hanging out and observing, it was Phil Jackson's last year, and Bob came in and would work with Luke Walton almost every day. And
Tate's a gorgeous guy too, right?
Yeah, he is, absolutely. And Bob and I used to hang out, and I'd watch his deal with Luke, but then he would leave the Lakers. When the Lakers would go on a road trip, Jason Kidd would fly him in to New Jersey and work with him there, or Dallas, wherever he was at the time. But yeah, great stuff, Frank. What we want to do is we want to take a short commercial break and bring you back on. Before I go to commercial, though, Scott, I want to read one of my favorite quotes about Frank from Lute Olson. I think this is a great quote. Okay, I've known Frank since he was a student at Long Beach State, and no writer ever worked harder at studying and understanding basketball. When I was coaching, I always put more stock into what he said about high school players than anyone I knew, including his staff, Scott.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, he's the best there is at evaluating the potential of basketball players. Now, Lute Olson was the coach at Long Beach State when you were a student there, right, Frank?
Yeah, I had just become a freshman. I had been working at the paper a year, and I was a freshman because he kind of, took over Tarkane because he had been at Long Beach City College. So he took over for 1 year, 24-2 on probation, and then he went to Iowa. So I was a freshman, and I got on the newspaper. I spent, I think, like 1 year on the school paper because I really didn't need it because I was at a real paper and kind of learning there. But so I would go to all the basketball games and watch the practices and talk to him. And it's great. And Jerry Tarkanian was the same way. I got to know. I didn't know him when he was at Long Beach, but I got to know him in Vegas. And here's a kid, myself was 18, 19, and guys like Lute Olson, Jerry Tarkanian, and Coach Miller knows this. The people who are the hardcore basketball guys, no matter how famous or rich or iconish they become, they're at their most basic. They're hardcore basketball people who love the game, and when they find somebody who shares that passion, legitimate passion, not guys who are just trying to be on ESPN or be on TV or be talking heads, and by way of whatever avenue it can be, it just happens to be basketball. But when they find somebody who enjoys, I would listen to those guys. And Mike, I'm sure the same way. I could just sit there and listen to them talk about the game and philosophize
for hours and hours.
And you get mesmerized because I sense that, you just were like, you left thinking, God, I know more about the game now than I did a day ago. And it's just a great thing because then you watch the game and you get a sense that you're, okay, now I'm grasping some of these things. And then again, I'm sure, Mike, even as the older you get, you never stop learning about the game. And I think even when you were a coach winning championships, if you were still coaching that, you would say, you know what, I know more about the game now than I did, when I really was coaching,
And no question. I think Frank, yeah, you are a little bit older than me, not much, but a little bit. But, we both were young and precocious and wanted to be involved with basketball and loved it. I started coaching at a very young age. I started at 16 years old coaching at a YMCA, fourth graders, and then 17 fifth graders. I was 18. I was a head coach of a frosh soft team at Blair High School. 19, I was the JV coach at Blair High School. And so, like you, when you start young, you kind of gravitate to those, I gravitated to Coach Gorgian or, people like that, Jerry Tarkanian. Well, Stein and Gerg were the guys that kind of taught me my basketball. And that's when UNLV had it going. And I was really, really a young high school coach and would spend a lot of time with them in the summers. And like you said, the hardcore basketball people will welcome young people like you were and like I was and take us under their wing and spend time with us and teach us. And I think that's great. I'm really glad that I gravitated at a very young age to doing what I wanted to do.
And not to be too sanctimonious about this or arrogant. I know you just as I say this, you can know where I go. It's the point now where people say, well, did you read what's the name wrote? I go, you know what? Unless I'm looking for a specific bit of information that somebody might have, I just don't. I don't want to read people's writing about the game. I'll watch games with the sound turned down. I can't listen to any of this ESPN stuff because, quite frankly, I don't feel like I'm learning anything. If I'm going to listen to somebody, talk about a game, I want to learn something. I don't want to hear people spouting off about, them going to Duke or whatnot. I want to hear something that is going to increase my knowledge of the game.
Yeah, no doubt. Frank, can you hold on for a minute or so? We'll take a short commercial break and we'll come back. And by the way, our phone number is 1-800-893-9562. If you have a question for Frank or you want to call in after our break, 1-800-893-9562. Frank, we'll take a short break. Just hold the line, please.
Okay, thanks.
Andy, go ahead. About Medicus Graphics Center located in Los Angeles, California. Medicus is the official printer and graphic designer of Time Out with Coach Miller. Medicus does a tremendous job for any printing need from big to small, whether you want to print a book or a 4-color poster or business cards. Go see my friends at Medicus Graphics Center in Los Angeles, California, located at 2030 Hyperion Avenue. Tell them Coach Miller sent you. Medicus will take care of you like they've taken care of me.
16 made a dream with this basketball. Coach Miller on the court and we going hard. Pass the rock to the paint. I give it my all or be like Chris Paul. Shoot the 3-point, y'all. Look, it's Time Out with Coach Miller. 14 straight conference championships, we winners. It don't stop from the bottom to the ceiling, cause all I know is win and we winning. Full focus, we got a topic to discuss. High school, prep school, small colleges, yup. Another special guest today, listen up. It might get a little hectic from the stuff we discuss.
Hey, Scott, we're back on the air. That was little Kevin doing a little tidbit of our theme song, Time Out with Coach Miller.
Needs a better name, man. That's such a boring. It's too dry a name for a rap song.
You know, it doesn't have any street cred, does it?
Yeah, call it like Winnin' or something.
Winnin', yeah. Well, you know, here's the thing. Little Kevin's disappeared. He owes us a third verse, and that hasn't come through yet. And moreover, when I emailed him and I said, I didn't even mention the third verse that we're missing, Chris, but I said, hey, we want to know, people have called in and said or emailed, what's the name of the theme song? And you know what he said? It's called Time Out with Coach Miller. I said, Kevin, that's not a name. That's the name of our show.
No, he could have just called it Time Out.
Yeah, he could have done.
Period.
He could have done something. But anyway, it is available on iTunes along with the rest of our shows. Scott, how does our listening audience get our show on iTunes?
Well, for those of you who remember newspapers, to get into iTunes, what you do is you go to iTunes.com and then you type in Time Out with Coach Miller. You subscribe to it. It's totally free. And that way you can go in, you can pull out all the back episodes, catch up on all of Coach and his friends and all their tidbits and information about basketball. And that way you'll be able to get those twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays.
That's right. You know, for example, Scott, we had that great show when we had Westchester High School in.
Yep.
And in live in studio, and we had so many calls and call-ins. Chris, you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So they can go in and they can see the episode of Westchester High School.
Well, see, the good thing is, like last week when I was at the Maranatha tournament, you know, I was telling different teams about the show and everything. And the great thing was I had guys from Pasadena High School's team. I don't think it's still up on that episode isn't up on the internet, but they were so happy that they can go back and listen to it that they were just like, wow, you know, we can listen to it and you can go on iTunes and get it in. And, you know, they're telling other players and other players are looking at me like, okay, when are we going to be on?
Good. Well, tonight we've got Frank Burleson on, who's, I think, the best college basketball. I guess he's not just writing about college basketball now, high school basketball writer in the business. I mean, and Frank, I'm kind of sad, though, that you're not with the Press Telegram anymore. I mean, I have to say, it's great that you're doing your own thing, and I support it, but I'm kind of sad. I don't buy the Press Telegram anymore since you left.
Well, what you got to do now is, because they called me a couple of weeks ago. In fact, Bob Kaiser, he's now the sports editor, you know, the Orange County Register. was expanded. They have a Long Beach edition now. In fact, I heard the new publishers, the new owners announced yesterday that they're going to go and actually start within the year or within the next 6 or 7 months, they're going to have a LA edition. So they're going to take on LA newspaper group that owns Daily News, Press Telegram, Pasadena Star News, Daily Breeze, those papers, and obviously the monolith, the LA Times.
Good luck with that.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, quite frankly, I hope it works. But I'm not sure that this model works anymore. In terms of revenue, you don't. As Mike would know, people always thought that they'll say, "Well, how many subscribers do you get?" Well, that's important, but the the newspaper industry's main revenue streams didn't come from subscribers. It was retail and classified advertising.
Yep.
These days, with Craigslist or whatnot, or Amazon.com,
there is no classified anymore. There's no way that the OC newspaper will work in LA.
Yeah, there's no way to. Again, the revenue streams. I mean, you don't need to pay to buy or sell anything anymore to advertise. You put it on Craigslist for free. It's
right. No.
I hope it works because I think we, as a society, we need traditional newspapers, the traditional journalism that they've always provided. But I just, I'm pragmatic. I just don't see it working.
I can see the OC paper expanding into Long Beach successfully because the news is somewhat merged.
Right.
But there's no way that it would work north of Long Beach, and they won't find any advertising.
Okay, we've got a call. We've got a call in caller right now. Caller, you're on the air.
Hello. I want to say there is something to be said for holding something in your hands and reading a paper.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll ever go away.
Yeah, that is my favorite. I have the LA Times app on my phone, and I do not like reading the paper on the phone. I like sitting there in the morning at the coffee shop or eating a donut or whatever, and actually sitting there holding a newspaper.
Well, it's my same thought. It's my same thought on the handheld devices for reading books. My wife's got she reads them on her iPad and stuff. I go, you know what? I like turning the pages of a book. I like feeling the book. I like reading a book and knowing, hey, if I ever want to read it again, I can pull it off myself and look at the pages and think about it. To me, reading is one of those things that you read a book, you read a paper. Again, if you're reading headlines or text or story links, that's fine. But to sit and read something that's going to take you 15, 20 minutes or several days or several weeks, to me, I want the real entity in my hands.
And, Frank, you and I have discussed this very topic, which is not really a basketball topic, but you and I like to talk about other things, too. And you're right. As you mentioned earlier about the publishing industry that I'm in, is that I don't think Kindle is... we do Kindle, but I don't think they're going to put traditional books, out of business because there's so many people that want to hold a book in their hand and turn the page or highlight something or underline something. And I think the same is true of newspapers. I like on Sunday morning sitting down with a newspaper and holding it and turning the pages and looking at things and having that. It's kind of like, Frank, like an interaction.
Yep.
Instead of just sitting at a computer screen reading the internet.
One of my favorite things I remember about being in high school was, Coach, I know you remember this paper when they had the National. Remember the National sports paper?
Oh, yeah.
The National was just, for anybody who doesn't remember this paper, it was just an all sports paper. It was, 32 pages of nothing but sports.
Probably, what do you think this, Mike? It was the closest thing to kind of a print version of what ESPN, when it's really good, was, where you have quality writers, quality reporters, not just a bunch of, egomaniacal guys who are, tap dancing their way to TV exposure or their next gig, wherever it's going to be, or, superfluous understanding of the sport they're talking about. But it was the best of the best. I mean, they hired everybody across the country.
Yeah.
obviously it was a financial. They never really figured out a way to make money and to pay for all this outrageous financial outlay they had. But it was great. It was like reading, watching a Major League Baseball and NBA All-Star game every time you picked up the paper, because those were the elite writers and reporters. I guess the closest thing in terms of sheer literary skill that's somewhat connected to sports would be what's that Bill Simmons website he has that's connected with the
Grantland. That's a great site.
Yeah.
But I remember going to get that paper when I was playing for Coach. When I was in 12th grade, 11th and 12th grade, we used to go get that paper. And, they didn't have a high school section really back then, but we would go get it, and, we'd be on road trips, and me and Coach or me and, whoever, we'd be in there, and we'd look at their college basketball section, which was probably about 8 pages long, and we'd sit there and analyze different teams, and especially during tournament time. Well, who do you think is going to win? Well, who do you think is going to be in this matchup? And then they'd have the breakdown of every game, and that was just great. Was just holding that newspaper, like you said. I grew up with my mom getting the LA Times from when I was a little kid, and I grew up reading the newspapers. So now it's just I hate not reading newspapers with the newspaper. It's just not the same to me.
Well, and again, Mike was referring to the Sunday paper, which is these days it's the Sunday. Even the Sunday Times is not nearly as big, but it's the one day where a paper is really big. Because there's days now during the week there's so little advertising at the Times you can damn near spin that thing on your little finger. That's how small and light it is. But I like reading the paper at my leisure. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm going to glance through the sports really quick, see if there's any headlines that catches your eye, or look at box scores or whatnot. You lay it down, then you come back and read a little bit, just a couple other stories longer, and then you pull out the calendar section or the business section, or maybe on a Sunday you kind of skim through all the ads, the inserts,
the calendar section.
The Best Buy ads or whatever. You say, hey, there's some good sales going on or whatnot, You could pull, obviously, coupons or Groupons or whatnot off the internet, but it's just not the same thing.
It's not the same. But the other thing, Frank, that's not the same, that's so disappointing about reading the paper nowadays, is that the papers throughout the country have lost all of the great writers for the most part.
Oh.
And you're just one example of one paper and one great writer, but it's an exodus all over the country of the great writers leaving the papers and going to, whether it's television or going to some sort of other form of media or internet. And that leads me to, I've still got this caller on the air that I need to see if he has a question for you, but that leads me to what you're doing now is, you've made the exodus from the paper, but your career path now is somewhat unique because you're actually working for yourself. Now, by the way, Steve Gerdheim is also doing the same thing. You know that, right? He's
got it's kind of UNLV based coverage.
Yeah. But in terms of the same thing, working for himself, he's got his own thing going, and he's strictly covering UNLV, football and basketball, and he covers the local high schools in Vegas too, to be fair. But
I think especially as it might relate, if there's guys that UNLV is recruiting or stuff like that.
No question. And so, but I want to talk about what you're doing in your unique, career path and how you've, transitioned from the exodus from the paper business to your own business. But before we get into that, caller, did you have a question for Frank Burleson?
I did. I was wondering if you find any difference in the medium. We're talking about holding the paper in your hands as the reader, but as the author, do you find any difference in the work itself?
Yeah, I think so, because, one of the things, from the time I was in high school through probably, in the last 3 or 4 years at the Press Telegram, because I was never, ever really, because I live in Orange County, so South Orange County, so I rarely, unless I was going in for a game or to talk to somebody, I was never around to get the paper. But I used to be that I would always I methodically would keep a string book. I would cut out every story I read, glue it in the pages, and mark down the dates that it ran in, so you could always refer back either research-wise. Because remember, the other thing that we didn't have back then was that little thing called Google, that little Google thing, which basically just replaced libraries or informational things where you go to search that information. Now can you imagine writing a term? Remember that, you do a term paper and you got to spend hours in the library and go check out references. Now you never have to leave your dorm room. You just hit Google. But it's the same thing. I used to save it'd be great because, it's one of those things. I'd write a story and go, God, that was a terrible story, and I wouldn't even read it. I'd cut it out and paste it. Then maybe 2 or 3 months later, I'd read it. I go, you know what? That actually story was pretty good. And, you got to distance yourself from a little bit. Nowadays, you write a story, you write a column, and all it is a bunch of, you're scrolling on a little 4-inch screen, and you shut it, and it's closed, and there's no tangible evidence. It's not something you could actually put on a plaque or put in a frame and something you're proud of and hang it on the wall. It's almost like, well, I guess you could print it out, and print it out in that fashion, but then it just becomes, typewritten pages almost.
So Frank, did you, in some ways then, are you saying you enjoyed the medium of the paper to deliver your message more so than the medium of the internet?
Yeah, I think so, and I'll tell you why. And you brought it up. When I was doing it, very few people covered it, and you took such ownership and pride in. Nowadays you see how these internet yahoos, these guys 22, 23 with their school sites trying to, make money by getting hits from fans, interviewing the athletes that their school is recruiting. But I remember, I took a certain pride. I would sit in the gym for 14 hours and be the only media person there, and I enjoyed the feeling that I was offering readers more about basketball than they could get anywhere else. Now it's almost like a lot of the readers, all they want to them basketball coverage is, guys who read about your team or report who they're recruiting or stuff like that. They're not. I remember the greatest compliments I would get would be from coaches or people who would say, God, I talked to my friend and he said, you know what, I was actually at that game and reading the story. That's exactly the same game I saw. So he did a good job of reporting it and articulating it. To me, that's what I like. I like people thinking that who knew basketball, saying, he's actually offering people some insight into what's going on and why things happen, as opposed to just throwing in a bunch of cute phrases and quotes and faking it.
Well, the internet, the thing is that now it's about smack talk, speed, and you have an ADD populace reading it. So a lot of the time when people are reading the websites, they have 5 or 6 other tabs open, where when we were reading Sunday papers, you'd spend a half an hour and that was what you were focused on. There was nothing else, maybe some breakfast or something, but you're reading the paper and you're reading it beginning to end. You're reading an article, it's beginning to end. And it's not like you're going to be picking up, reading the Boston Globe and then picking up the New York Post and then picking up the LA Times and going from article to article without finishing one. And I think that, you get the benefit of the speed, the immediacy, but you also don't have the standards that newspapers are held to. They're not held accountable. They can put anything in there. They could make mistakes. They can't even get sued. And
and the other thing is it used to be. Now everybody's in such rush. And again, now they're a little bit better since ESPN.com's got an ombudsman now, because they got so much criticism. Remember, people in mainstream media newspapers would break a story or something, and ESPN's guys would just immediately latch onto it and kind of put their own spin on it and make it like they broke the story.
Yeah.
But nowadays, if you notice, anytime you hear any kind of news stories, if one of their guys isn't the one who broke the story or reported it first, they'll say as first reported by Yahoo or whatnot. And of course, in the NBA these days, they say that a lot about Yahoo, because I think that the best NBA reporter / writer, I guess, going these days is probably what's his name, Adrian Wojnarowski from
He's one of the best in the business right now in terms of breaking stories, and there's a lot of different reporters, whether it's on ESPN or CBS News or CBS Sports or NBC Sports or whatever, that they're piggybacking off of what the guys at Yahoo Sports are saying.
Yeah, as they say in the trade, you're kind of just chasing them all the time. You're always trying to chase them and catch up, and you chase them, and I kind of get that story now. I get my sources to say what they've already reported, and then then they're already breaking another story. So you're always chasing. It's like the coaches who are trying to chase their competition, and they're always one or two steps ahead of them because they've got and again, not to pat him on the back, but Coach Miller, people were kind of chasing him in his heyday because nobody worked harder and no one had a great insight as to and again, I don't know, again, not to pat you on the back, but there's the great saying in coaching, and I'm sure it's not just basketball. There's the real coaches, and then there's the talent collectors. And certainly, Coach Miller had great talent because he worked hard and he identified the players who could play for him and those who couldn't. But he also coached them, and I think that's what separates the really, really good coaches and the good programs from the fraudulent ones. The fraudulent ones will win championships at times or a lot of games because they can sweet talk their way or whatever to get in a lot of talent. But when they actually have those players, they become stagnant. They don't get better, and they really don't know how to take that quote-unquote talent and translate it into quality winning basketball.
That reminds me of my years at UCLA. When Lavin was there.
Well, I appreciate it, Frank. And, people forget that I started out, I was the youngest high school head coach in the state of California at 21 years old at Cathedral High School. And my center was a 5'11" Hispanic guy. And we won the Santa Fe League and went to the Final Four of the CIF. And we beat Harvard Westlake twice. And,
was that the year you guys lost to Banning?
No, we lost to, who did we lose to? We lost to Beaumont and Scott Haskins. Do you remember Scott Haskins, Frank?
Went to Oregon State. Yeah, big, long-arm, white, slender kid, yeah.
And he was a first-round draft pick, by the way, after Oregon State.
Yeah.
And we lost to Scott Haskins in the semifinals of the CIF. And my center was 5'11". We lost by 2 or 3, and we held him to his career low. It was about 17 points. I remember, Frank, we played a triangle and 2 on him, and what we did was we had one guy front him who was about 5'11", and we had one guy behind him. Now, whatever side of the block he went to, we had a guy behind him. So now we gave up a lot of open short corner baseline jumpers to a pretty good player who was a 6'4" guy on their team. And we lose a very, very close game. The next game, Beaumont High School, Scott Haskins went to Beaumont High School. They won the CIF championship against a team in our league, Beljeff. They won, and he had 58.
Jeez.
And then he went to Oregon. Back then, Frank, that was so long ago that I don't think the Southern Section teams played in the state championship back then.
No, that's actually in relative. It seems like a long time. I guess it would seem like decades if you're only 20 or 25. But I think until the LA City first started playing in state playoffs for about a year or two. Then the Southern Section, and the first year it was, I can remember now, the first year the Southern Section played in the state playoffs was when Todd Murphy would have been class of 87
or 88.
No. It's earlier than that. It was 81 or 82 because the Poly team. Remember the Poly team that beat that great San Marcos team, Mike, that was like 26-0, and they were just did John Corpus and Jerry Kaczewski, all those little players, and they were just a classic traditional high school team of what people used to think of. And Poly was down by 9 and beat them. And that was 81. So the following year, 82, when Lakewood, everybody kind of thought Lakewood was going to go to the state because they rolled to the 4A title, beat Inglewood at the arena, beat Cleveland with Brent Saberhagen and Keith Morrison and Kevin Holmes, and then lost to Mark Wade and Gilbert Wilburn and Banning.
And not a lot of people remember that he played basketball as well as baseball.
Reagan, yeah. And then Carson with Eldridge Hudson, who's probably would probably be on the short list of any conversation about
El Hut,
Southern California. El Hut, yeah.
El
and
Hut.
then Carson, I think beat Saint Ignatius or somebody like that from San Francisco. And then the following year, who won it? The following year was 82 or 83. Then 83.
Well, but
Crenshaw won it. Crenshaw beat Mater Dei in the semis and beat Poly in the Southern Regional Finals, and then beat Bishop O'Dowd.
Right.
The Bishop O'Dowd team where Brian Shaw was the reserve as a senior.
And here's the thing, Frank, is that the city section got into that state level playoff and state championship before the CIF Southern section did, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, they were up big because I think Coach West teams played in a couple of states before the Southern section became involved.
Yeah, I think so too. But back to this Scott Haskins deal. So we held him to his career low. The next game he gets 58, goes off to Oregon State. He starts there, played there for 4 years, and then he was drafted. He was a first-round pick, and he may have got injured in the NBA or something. But he was a really, really good high school player. I mean, at a school that was sort of a no-name, Beaumont High School, public school.
Yeah.
And his coach was a guy that I really liked. He was a really good high school coach. His name was Alex Boyd. He used to wear cowboy boots. And years later, Frank, Alex Boyd, when I was coaching in junior college, Alex Boyd showed up as an assistant coach. Do you remember John Chambers at Mount San Jacinto?
Oh, yeah, Mount San Jack, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Years later, he shows up, and this is years later. I mean, I was very established then at LA City, and we won 14 straight conference championships and, multiple state titles and so on. And this old guy walks in the gym with cowboy boots, and Coach Miller. And I didn't recognize him at first. It was, 20 years later, but it was Alex Boyd. He was John Chambers' assistant. And two old guys with cowboy boots, Frank, hanging out and riding Harleys. Those guys were unique guys. Now, hey, caller, thank you for calling in. We appreciate your call and your question to Frank. And if you want to call in the show, it's 1-800-893-9562. Frank, before we move on, let's talk about that transition that you've made. I mean, you've got your own. It's really your own business now. I mean, you're still doing what you do.
What I do is, and again, it's everything I do is kind of basketball related. I have the website, as you said, FirstTimeBasketball.com, which is a free site, and what I use that for is, like tonight, I'm in Phoenix right now, and there's a little 4-game event tonight and 4 games tomorrow, and I'll write kind of a not a full-blown newspaper, but I'll write basically my observations, what happened, and so a little semi-soft player analysis and just talk about the games tomorrow. But my main source of income these days is I have a Burleson basketball scouting service, which I write evaluations of high school players across the gamut from basically everywhere I see them nationally. And I have about 70 Division I clients, and I also sell the service to NBA. I've got about 12 to 15 NBA clients right now, which fluctuates year to year based on which GMs get fired. You know what I mean? And if one of my guys gets fired and he doesn't get another job, and he's replaced by somebody I really don't know, and then I lose clients that way. But that's where I get my main source of income, and the NBA guys kind of like it because not only, I get, they have their own college scouts, but I give them my analysis of college players, but I also give them a lot of analysis. What they want these days with the one and done situation, and they're not really, because of the collective bargaining agreement, when the one and done became part of the vernacular in terms of guys could no longer go straight from high school. They had to be 1 year removed from a high school graduation class. The NBA does not allow their personnel, scouting personnel, to really feel much in the way of high school stuff at all. in reality, other than I think maybe the McDonald's practices or whatnot. So and again, there's such a large, as Mike knows, there's such a large financial investment when you draft somebody in the first round, not only in the salary you pay and you're committed to giving them, but in the time and effort and money you spend researching them and vetting them and scouting them. And then also, it's such a risky thing, because if you make a wrong pick, then you set the franchise back for like the classic example is when Lenny Bias died and how it hamstrung Boston for so long. So these days they want all the information they can get. So what I provide for my NBA clients is, anybody I think has a great chance to go to college and then enter the NBA draft. I'll write more detailed stuff about guys like that than I will for the college guys. Because college guys, you say, hey, he's really good, he can play for you, that's fine. NBA guys, they want everything from his personality, how he developed, what's his work ethics like. Does he have friends or relatives who might drag him into trouble in terms of, are they gang related? Are they criminals? Are they gamblers? Or anything like that? They want every bit of information, because, you make a wrong draft pick and it's for a first round pick or a lottery pick, that's a $3, $4, $5 million mistake or even more.
That's a career.
The guy, yeah, and then not only that, you make enough of those draft picks and you're fired. So they want all the information that they can get, and they don't consider anything being too much information. So that's why I'm able to get pick. And every year when people see my reports and say, "Man, you were right about that guy," when everybody else, Chad Ford or whatnot, was raving about him, you said this kid, and you were right. And I think the longer I do this, eventually I'll get a larger percentage of the NBA, as well as hopefully more colleges.
What's interesting, Frank, is I want to speak to the scouting service. Well, first the NBA thing. You're absolutely right. I mean, I experienced that last year with our player from Los Angeles College Prep, Norvell Pell, who declared for the draft, went into the draft, went through the process. I remember we had a workout for him. We had 25 to 30 NBA people came to that, representing about 14 to 15 teams. Many teams sent more than one person. And I knew it was kind of serious when I walked into the Spectrum Club, and the first two guys I saw were Jerry West and Mitch Kupchak. And I said, wow, so Frank, what you're saying is exactly right, is that there's so much at stake. And with guys that, Norvell wasn't going to be a lottery pick, and he probably wasn't going to be a first-round pick. People were looking at him more as a second-round guy, a guy you could take a chance on maybe. But gamble on the come, so to speak. Exactly. And he did play pretty good for us. We did get him to play hard, and we did get him to, play a lot better offense, I think. But the reality is, like you're saying, there's so much at stake that they really want to turn over every rock to see what's underneath it. And so your service is very valuable to all the NBA teams, all 30 teams. It's 30 teams now, right? Or is it 29?
30. Yeah, 30 franchises, yeah.
Yeah, it's 30, yeah. All 30 teams should want to take this service, because if they're not getting 2 or 3 minor pieces of information, they're losing out. It's really important. Let's talk a little bit, Frank, about projecting into this. I mean, we've had Clark Francis on our show, and he was a good guest, and he was fun. But you have more depth, I think. Clark may have more breadth because he may see more guys than you. He may travel more, but you've got more depth in what you do. And so,
I think when it comes to player, and you probably saw this, through all the years that you would not only coach but go out and watch games, try to evaluate guys in terms of for friends of yours, or for just the fact that, do I want this kid to play for me? And then obviously it's a lot more than just his innate skill or athleticism. It's, can I coach this kid? Is he going to buy into what I'm going to try to sell him on? Is he going to buy into being all those things? And I think the one thing that people, and I'm sure it's like a lot of different industries or things, is you can't think you're the final word. You can't think that everything you see is right. You're going to be wrong. And I think what people get mistaken, there's a lot of guys, I won't name them, but there's a lot of guys who were used to be in this business or no longer in this business who would say whatever their initial thing was, oh, he's a great player. And they, because they saw him once and he played well, and then they don't want to admit that their opinions changed or that they might have been wrong, or God, that kid proved me wrong. He is better than I thought. Or if you can't do that, then you're not being honest with yourself or the people you're trying to serve. You have to admit, say, as I tell them all the time, hey, this isn't an exact science. I think my batting average is pretty good in terms of seeing guys that maybe other people didn't think would be good, and they proved right. But hey, I'm also the same guy who saw Paul George play 25 times in 3 years at Palmdale or wherever, and saw him play at Fresno, and there'd be games where he wouldn't score, and I swear at his high school at times it looked like he just wasn't emotionally invested in the game or his teammates, and a lot of physical ability. I would have never guessed that he'd become the player that he's come today. So, hey, I'm not infallible. It's not an exact science. This isn't algebra or calculus or something where there's only one answer, and if you do certain things, you're going to always reach the same conclusion. It's a very, very subjective thing, and you have to realize, hey, I'm not going to be right all the time, or I'm going to miscalculate, or I'm going to... Because, again, there's certain things in basketball that no matter how many times you watch a kid play in how many different settings, if you really don't know the kid and you don't know the external factors that impact his decision-making and impact his work ethic or impact his ability to become a better player, unless you know those, you're always going to be... There's always going to be a lot of guesswork. What you want to do is just kind of cut down the guesswork and make good, solid evaluation based on, as I always call it, my mental database, based on every player I've seen since I was a teenager. I kind of mentally always do a checklist. Well, let's see, everybody wants to compare him. Well, hey, I saw Raymond Lewis when he was in high school. I saw Magic Johnson. I saw LeBron. I saw, Byron Scott and stuff like that. So I see guys, and my mind immediately goes to what these guys were at the same age. If I say to myself, God, you know what, he really is kind of like that kid, they'll say, hey, maybe he can be. But again, you can't think that you have every answer, or that only your opinion's right, or you're never wrong. Because if you do that, then you're fooling yourself, and you won't be doing this successfully very long.
Right, good point. Now, let's talk for a minute about this next NBA draft, and let's, you again, you may not have seen every player on the board or people that are considering, but I think you have a lot of depth to the guys you have seen. I think you have some good insight. Let me throw a couple names out at you, and just tell me. Let's play a little game here. Let me throw a name out, and you tell me. Scott, what are we going to put Frank on the spot? 3 words about the guy. Let's have three words.
3 words?
Yeah, 3 words about the guy.
3 words or less.
3 words or less. Okay. Aaron Gordon.
Great athlete, very raw. What position will he be?
Gotcha. Will he be a first-round pick?
Oh, yes.
Oh, he will be a lottery selection. Lottery, of course, being 1 through 14. The teams that don't make the playoffs, or 1 through 14 teams don't make the playoffs, those selections are always considered lottery picks. He's just got too many innate physical tools, and he plays hard and things like that. But when I see him, I think, okay, great size, great strength, and enormous explosiveness, plays hard, he's got some skill. But in my mind, I go, well, is he a 3? Is he a 4? Who does he guard at his side? All those things. So again, someone's going to draft him probably closer to top 7, 8, or 9 than the back end of the lottery. But again, he's someone that I think you're going to have to wait a little bit longer, and you're going to have to continue to teach him a little bit more, or helpfully, maybe he needs to be working on his perimeter skills and be a 3-man or a wing or whatnot. So he's very, very good, but he's the classic. In the old days, even the not so long ago days, guys like that would at least play 2, and most of them played 3 years. But now, guys that's good now, that anybody that's going to be drafted pretty high the top half of the first round, they're going to leave. They're not going to wait around to become quote-unquote better players.
Don't you find his shooting troublesome and his free throw percentage, about 50% at the line, a little alarming?
Absolutely. I mean, again, in the old days, we'd say, well, that's what he's going to, in the off-season, in the spring, when they have all the individual workouts, and summer now, the NCAA allows you to work out with the coaches. You say, well, that's what he's going to target on in the spring and summer, and then next year, let's see how much he's improved, and maybe he goes out, or maybe he becomes even a little bit, he matures, maybe he grows another inch, becomes a more refined baller. Again, that's not our generation. This generation is, if you've got any discernible skill or potential, and an NBA team is willing to draft you, odds are you're going to go. People, they're looking for the short term. It's hard to think of all the money. And, if I was that age, would I turn it down? Probably not. But again, I think, like Marcus Smart, I think he definitely improved his overall potential to be successful pretty quickly in the NBA. But, not only he's played another year at Oklahoma State, but remember he played that whole summer thing over in Prague with, Billy Donovan and Tony Bennett, played on that team. So he got better at that. He got, he's another year more mature. He's a little more probably, deeper into his decision making and his maturity. So all those factors help too. But again, Marcus Smart is a dinosaur. Guys, they're going to do that once every 7 or 8 years, where you're a definite top 5 or 6 pick, and you actually decide to come back for another year.
Right, but see, for me, the Aaron Gordon thing is troublesome because he's 6'8", and in the NBA, people are looking at him as a power forward, Scott. And here's the thing, like Frank said, what is he, a 3? Is he a 4? Here's the problem: he's a 6'8", 225, 230 pound. Power forward. That's
barely a power forward on your team,
right? And that's not really big enough to be a power forward in the NBA. And it's troublesome, his inability to shoot and his free throw percentage. So I don't know that he can ever be a 3, Frank, in that league.
Well, again, you think about it. You think about the success he's had in high school or travel ball or Oakland Soldiers or whatnot, USA basketball. It's always because of two things: his impressive strength, his verticality, his lateral, all those physical tools. Plus, he plays real hard. So guys with that kind of physical ability, that strength, those physical gifts, who play hard on the high school and even for most parts of the console, you don't have to be a well-refined, polished, savvy, intuitive player. You're going to get by just on your innate physical gifts and the fact you play hard. You get to the NBA, and suddenly let's just say if we want to consider Aaron Gordon, I hate to throw that word around great, because great is, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Wilt Chamberlain. There's about 8 or 9 guys in my mind that I think of as great. People use that word too easily now. But if you were to call him an upper-tier athlete for college basketball, which, in other words, probably in the top 2% of athletes, suddenly you go to the NBA, and now he's maybe middle-of-the-pack athlete. If you're 6'7", you're not a great athlete unless you're LeBron James or Dominic Wilkins or somebody like that. Now he becomes that gift of athleticism and strength suddenly is negated by the fact that everybody in the NBA is pretty big and strong, and the guys who are made it in the NBA have immense skill. The best players in the NBA get better every year.
They also
and
have
now
that drive.
You're trying. Who's Aaron Gordon going to jump over in the NBA? Very few people. Who's he going to out-muscle? Very few people. Who's he going to outwork? Well, maybe the occasional guy who's just in it for the paycheck. So again, does he, if not at Arizona, does he, spend enough time and get enough good individual instruction or be around people who really can, the Gergoviches or whoever you want to throw into that cottage industry, which is now the individual workout guru? Does he do that and become a better basketball player? Because you're right, Mike. You could not throw him into an NBA game right now, a high-level NBA game, and he would. There's no way you could do that and expect him to actually help a team win a game.
No, I just have some major concerns about him because, like you said, in some ways he's already peaked out because he plays so hard right now that even now in college basketball, I see so many college games, players don't play hard. I mean, they just don't.
No.
When you see a guy play hard, he stands out. And the guy, he's big and strong for college. He plays hard. He really stands out. Hey, we've got a caller. Caller, you're on the air.
Hello, how you doing?
Good.
Hi, who am I speaking with?
This is Coach Miller. Do you have a question for our guest, Frank Burleson?
Hey, how you doing, Frank? This is Marlon Morton.
Hey, how's it doing, Marlon?
How you doing?
Marlon.
Good.
Marlon Morton, a former guest on our show. Frank, we've got Marlon.
Bobby Brown. Where's Bobby Brown? Get him. Let's have a three-way conversation about how he can go from being a walk-in at Long Beach State to an NBA guard.
Hey, I like it. Marlon, give us an update. How is Westchester High School doing?
We're doing pretty good. We're 6-2 now. We lost two real heartbreakers. We was up 16 in the fourth quarter in one game, in the championship game, and up 11 in the fourth quarter, and blew them both. But, you know, those kind of games, they're good for character because they had a team meeting, and, you know, now they're working harder now.
Who beat you? For our listeners, who beat you, Marlon?
Redondo Union beat us in their championship game there, and Bishop Montgomery.
And that was a great. That Redondo Union tournament was a great tournament.
Yeah, it was. It had some of the top teams. Some of the top teams in it.
So you lost to.
We lost in the semis. I'm sorry. We lost in the semis, and we played. Then we came back and beat
Bosco. You beat Bosco in the third place game. Yeah.
That's a good one, Frank. Did you see that tournament?
Yeah, I wasn't there because I went up to Oakland for a tournament that Saturday, but I saw that, and he's right. They were up. You guys were up by like 15 with about 6 minutes to go, I think, against Redondo, and just the wheels kind of fell off, and they started the little white guard, hit a bunch of shots, and they actually forced a few turnovers with their pressure, and everything that had to go right for them did. And everything that could have gone wrong for Westchester did. But I'm curious to think, what do you think? And I tell you who's getting better every time I see him is Stevie Thompson's son over at Montgomery. Steven, boy, he's a good basketball player.
You know what? I was telling somebody, me and Byron Scott are good friends, and Byron came and spoke to the kids today. And I was telling them about Stevie. The thing that's so good about him, he never gets rattled, but he has that the pro moves, and what I mean by that is he knows when that first step is so quick, that it throws kids off because kids aren't used to that. He'll lull you to sleep. He dribble real slow, and then when he sees a lane or a gap, or if you give him any kind of space, he'll hit you with a quick step and one dribble pull.
And I tell you what, and the thing is, and it's funny because I don't think I've ever recalled seeing a father and son whose games were more unalike. Stevie was all power and just rarely went outside of 14, 15 feet and would just post you up, slash you, drive you, jump over you, outwork you. And his son he's got two sons. One's a junior, Steven's a junior, and Ethan's a freshman. And then again, like you said, he's just so mature and fluid, and his jump is so easy. I mean, he shoots it deep and he's skinny. He's only about 155, 160 pounds. But again, his game, like you said, his maturity and he never seems to rattle. He never gets high or low. He just kind of lets okay, what are you going to give me? You want to get? Do I need the jumper? I mean, his mid-range game, he's got those floaters down pat.
His father Frank was the best 6'3" power forward that I ever saw in high school. I loved Stevie Thompson when he played at Crenshaw, and he really was a six. I mean, he started at guard, but only in name only when they did the introductions. They'd say,
even at Syracuse when they went to the '87 championship against Indiana. I mean, he was a guy who got big numbers. I think averaged 16, 17 games at Syracuse. We get 7, 8 rebounds every game against Big East national competition. Again, it just shows you that quickness to the rim, quickness to the ball, relentlessness, aggressiveness, all those things can negate a lack of a jump shot and traditional good size.
What was funny is I remember talking to Coach West about it is they would list them, in the starting lineup, they'd say, and at guard, they'd have 3 guards, back then. And at guard, 6'3", Stevie Thompson, blah, 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 had come out. But as soon as the game would start, Frank, he was down on the block posting up. I mean, the first play they'd run or getting a weak side rebound and dunking the ball. I mean,
or he'd catch him, and of course the big post guy would just stand right in back of him, and he'd just catch it and turn and face him up and either drive by him or turn and just, shoot a turnaround jumper over the top of him where he's just like, by the time he released the ball, even if he was a clanky shooter, he'd be so high that he not only, if he missed a jumper, he would always beat guys to the offensive rebound. And how many baskets did he get that way or off the press?
Yeah, so many. So
you know what was funny about what you just said? Because when we played them, because I know Stevie, I've been knowing him since back in the days, and we were playing them, and I was sitting on the bench, and I told one of our assistants, I said, like you said, Ms. Bertelson, I said, Stevie made damn sure his son could shoot a jumper.
Yeah.
He said, because
it's funny. You would hear a funny story, guys.
That he made sure that his weakness is their strength. And that's what I was telling somebody on the bench, when we were playing him. I was like, he made sure that they learned how to shoot. Now, they don't.
It's funny because
nowhere near him.
When Stephen was a freshman, and then back then he was about 145 when he was freshman Bishop Montgomery. He was playing for that Superior Athletes program with the guard that's at Mayfair now, Kendall, and I think Jeremy Hemsley is that Damon. They were playing at Rancho High or whatever in one of these, spring Adidas games. And I'm sitting there watching, and Stevie and his wife were sitting across the way up in the bleachers. And I'm sitting there watching Steven, and I think he had like 4 threes in one half. And I said, I texted Dad, and I said, congratulations. I've now watched in 10 minutes of basketball game more threes out of your son than I saw out of your entire career. And I looked at him across the table, and he just started laughing when he read the text.
Yeah, that's hilarious. It's true. Now, Marlon, catch us up on Westchester. So you're 6-2. You've lost two games kind of at the end of the game, it sounds like, to Bishop Montgomery and to Redondo Union, which are 2 really good teams. Okay, so what's next? Where do the Comets go from here?
Off to the 50th state.
We leave Wednesday. To go to Hawaii to play in a tournament. I forgot the name of the tournament.
The Iolani Classic.
Yeah, that's it. We'll go down there to play that. And I expect good things from us. I mean, we worked hard this last past week, Monday through Thursday. We didn't practice today. Like I said, we had Byron there, so Byron spoke. But we worked really hard. And the kids understand now. Because they were mad, they were really upset, especially both games, and that's one thing I was happy about. Some schools, these days, if they lose, they just take it. We just lost. But these guys were really upset about losing both those games, and today, after Byron talked to them and everything, we had another players only meeting basically, and they were like, we understand now. See, they didn't understand the tradition of the Westchester of playing hard, and when you're in the lead, you try to kill them. You try to put your foot on their necks, and just make sure that they understand they're not coming back.
You've had a lot of meetings. It sounds like, Marlon. The Comets have had a lot of meetings the last week or so. It sounds like.
I think it's more of they're meetings, but they're more gut checks to understand, this team is really good, and they understand. They didn't understand. They didn't understand to be collectively good. You know, you have like Leon that's really good, and then you have Miles good at one point of the game, Miles Stewart. Then you have Josh Rideau good at one point, and then Cameron be good. And Elijah Stewart, you know, he plays hard, and Nick Hamilton, they just play so hard.
Yeah,
now,
Nick plays hard. And I'm going to give a special shout out to Leon. Hey, Frank, have you seen Westchester play at all? Do you know these players?
I saw Westchester play against. I saw the Redondo game. I saw the Long Beach Poly game, which I thought was a very good game. Poly was pretty close in the last quarter. They kind of pulled away. And the thing about Westchester, and I know you'll look at this as a compliment, and Mike, you would know this too. You know, it used to be not really that long ago, but in the 70s, 80s, high schools, you'd see a team and you'd see guys who were committed to winning and loyal to their teammates, and they all grew up together, and maybe they played JVs together, or you know, and they just kind of grew up together. And there was just, like you said, you were emotionally invested and physically invested in your team, your high school team doing well. Nowadays, and Westchester is one of the big, you know, I think Redondo with Reggie Morris does a good job, and Doug Mitchell at Bishop Montgomery, who we're talking about, I think his guys. But nowadays, there's so many, even these good teams, so-called good teams, you watch them and they look like individuals. They look like guys who have their own agendas. Their travel team coaches, bitching from the sideline about the high school coach, and the kids pissed because he's not, doing his thing. When you watch a Westchester team, no matter how talented or how good certain individuals might be it, when they had Amir or Trevor Reza or, even, the Tony Blands of the world, no matter how good they were, when you watch them, you sense that they cared more about winning for Westchester and the coaches and following the tradition of the program than they do about, how many shots do I get, or do I get to handle and show the coaches that I can handle. I mean, and again, we could talk about a couple of specific programs and the Comets that played them this year. They may have great individual talent, but they don't even come close to equaling the sum of all their individual parts. They're more individuals who happen to be playing at that particular school at the time. Almost
like an AAU team. I mean,
exactly like an AAU team. Yeah.
And what I like about Westchester and Marlon, I'm going to take you back 2 years. 2 years ago. I went to a practice at Westchester, and I got to see you, and I got to see Coach Azam, and I watched a practice, and I remember your JV team was undefeated. Am I right about that? Let's go back.
Yeah.
Not last year, the year before.
Yes.
Your JV team was undefeated. And I remember how excited Coach Azam was about the JV team. Now, this was when you guys were in the city section playoffs, and I think you went to the championship game or maybe won the city. I don't know, but you went far. It wasn't as if, Frank, this wasn't a rebuilding year. It wasn't like, they were throwing in the towel. It was in the heat of the playoff run, and all Coach Azam could talk about that day to me, Marlon, was his undefeated JV team. And to me, that's the epitome of it's a program. It's not just a team.
Well, Mike, you think about this. Think about how many programs today that how many of them even get their players from JVs? You either get
transfers.
great, quote unquote, great high school players when they're ninth graders, or transfers. You don't see guys like Westchester. So many Westchester guys are there for 4 years. I mean, I would hazard to guess 95% of them are. Whereas so many other programs, guys are there, transfers at their second or third schools. Or, okay, now a freshman shows up and suddenly he's beating out a guy who's been in the program for 2 years. You don't see that sense of earning your time, waiting your turn, going through, honoring the tradition of guys before you who,
right.
Worked their asses off to be part of to fully understand the system and the philosophy of what the coaches want. Nowadays, if there's any adversity at all, 95% of the best, quote unquote, best players quit. They'll just go somewhere else.
Right.
They quit.
Yeah. And that's what happens now. Frank, have you seen a great example of this? Is the point guard Marlon that you just mentioned, Leon the other couple minutes ago? Frank, have you this point guard? Leon has been there for what?
He's number 3, right? Number 3.
Yeah.
And he's been there.
Yeah.
He's been there for 3 years, and this is his first year starting on varsity.
Yeah.
And he's a really good player, right, Frank?
Oh, very good. But again, he's a product of a program where the players in it are emotionally and mentally and physically vested in the program. They understand, hey, if I'm not starting, it doesn't mean that the coach thinks I'm suck or something. It means that I'm not quite good enough, or I don't offer all the things that the guys ahead of me. So those guys, the good guys, continue to work hard, and the other guy is but unfortunately, so many guys now. I mean, I've seen guys this year that are on their 4th high schools. I've seen guys that have been that this is their 4th high schools. Can you imagine? I mean, so long, and not even so long ago, it was when somebody transferred, that was wow. I mean, when we were young, if we were in high school and we transfer or quit, it would be a traumatic experience. Hey, I'm leaving all the guys. I've gone to school. I got to go to a no school. No way. Nowadays, a kid from modern day, Mario Soto, who's a good player, he's been hurt a lot, but he's been in modern day for 3 years, started part of the year, and I guess lost his starting job. So the dad pulls him out of school. He's at San Juan Capistrano Saddleback Christian now, and he's going to be playing for Tom Lewis, and they're going to be playing modern day in a tournament after Christmas.
Yeah. Shea Cotton is a perfect example of that, who played 5 different high schools in 4 years.
Well, Frank, I'm a volunteer, as you know, and Marlon has helped me quite a bit at Los Angeles College Prep Academy. And we are a non-profit prep school. We're the cheapest, most inexpensive prep school in the world, and we have no paid people that work at the school, including me. Well, so I could say this: if they want to fire me, then they can fire me. I mean, I don't get paid anyway. We had 2 players in the program this year, and I was looking at their stuff. They were at 2 different guys at 4 different high schools in 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, when I see that, I actually feel bad for the student who probably didn't get a proper high school education, because you can't go into 4 different programs and expect to get the proper 4 years to even handle college. So, I mean, when I see star players, that reminds me of guys like your Lamar Odoms, your Leon Smiths. They're treated like professional athletes without giving them the proper basics to handle the money that they're given.
And what I like about what I like about Westchester's program is that they do bring the players up from JV, and that I'm sure there's a transfer here and there. I mean, who doesn't have a transfer? But what I'm saying, Frank, is what I like about Westchester's program is the players are in the program for 2, 3, or 4 years, and it's these guys that I had this year, these guys that were at 4 high schools in 4 years, they were hard to coach, Frank. I mean, one of them has already quit because he wasn't starting, and it's like, what do you want me to do? I mean.
And the funny thing is, they always think the grass is greener. One second. Well, the thing is, and that's the bad thing.
I was telling you, when I talk about the Westchester program and the history, like I always bring up the 2001 and the 2002 team that had 9 D1 players. They all could have left if they wanted to go somewhere else and been the star of that school, of another school. But they wanted to stay at Westchester because, one, they knew they were going to get coached well. But most of all, they cared about each other.
Right.
They really cared about each other. And they all had they've been there like 3 years. So Son Adams had been there 3 years. 3. Brandon Bowman, 3. And that team had 9 D1 players. And none of them, like I said, they could have left that senior year or that junior year, and none of them left. And they are, to this day, are still really good friends. Like, we have picnics, we have barbecues, we still do things. And I always explain that the Westchester thing is a family. We use it as a family. Because, now some of the older ones are having, they have their kids, and we would go see them in the hospital and stuff like that. And you don't find that no more, because these AAU guys have put so much in these kids' head and the parents' head that it's not togetherness or cohesiveness.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Hey, Marlon, I want to thank you for calling in and giving us an update on Westchester, what you're doing. You guys leave Wednesday for Hawaii. Chris, that's a great tournament, isn't it, that Westchester's going to?
Coach Marlon, you guys are going to have fun. I don't know if you went the other times that Westchester were in that tournament, but that is a great tournament. There's 8 usually nationally ranked teams. There's probably 6 really good teams in there this year. You guys also have a team from Osaka, from China, and from Okinawa this year also. So, a little international flavor, but it's a good team. And, you guys are playing a really good team of a really good private school from Hawaii in the first round, Kamehameha. And if you guys get past them, you have a really tough match, Hamilton from Tennessee, who has ESPN number 9 at the ESPN top 100 player in there on their team.
Yeah,
so
I saw Hamilton play last Saturday. Memphis Hamilton last Saturday, and
Kevon Looney
in Chicago. Yeah, they got beat badly by Chicago Simeon. I think Westchester. They're a classic example of a team where the dad's the coach and the 2 best players are sons, and all the dad does is just yell and scream at the officials and let the sons just cast off. If they would have happened to play Westchester would just beat them on effort and cohesiveness and the fact that they play with a scheme and a plan.
Yeah.
Well, Coach Marlon, I can tell you that whenever there's a LA team in a Ailani Classic, they have a really good cheering section. So you guys will have fans there.
All right, I really appreciate that.
Coach Marlon,
it's a nice concert. Yeah.
Thank you for calling in, and good luck. Safe travels to Hawaii.
All right, take care of yourself, and everybody have a nice Christmas.
Give us some updates if you can.
All right.
So Frank, we don't have a huge amount of time left. I want to bounce two more names by you, potential NBA draft guys, and then we'll let you go. But these 2 guys are guys I think you'll have a remarkable insight into. Deonte Burton. Let's start with him. Deonte Burton.
Yeah, Deonte's a guy I've seen play since, at a very, very young age. I think since he was in 8th grade. He started at Long Beach Cabrillo High and then, went over to Centennial and had to sit out his junior year and then had a very good senior year. I think they played Harvard Westlake a couple times, and Sarah, I think, ultimately beat them in the championship game, if I'm not mistaken. But, strong. I mean, he's a guy who's always been a scorer in high school. He would just, muscle people to the rim or jump over them or out-effort them in the NBA again. That's tough to do. At his size, I think he's about 6'1.5". He's going to have to, quote-unquote, become a point guard, an offense initiator, and, a guy who gets teams in the offense. So it's going to be tough. I think, as you well know, these days, so much is driven by what guys do in individual workouts, and when they put them through all the drills and stuff, all the pick and roll situation, which is such a major part of in offense these days, that where you only got basically by the time you get the ball into your attack zone, you might have 14, 15 seconds. So everything's what you can do with the ball in your hands to get a shot or get a teammate a shot. So I think. His physical strength, his size, he's proven that he can score pretty well at that position. I think what he does in the individual stuff when they, work him out, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see him go somewhere late in the 2nd round. Maybe he goes a little bit higher, but again, a lot of that is going to be driven by what he does when he starts working out with other quote-unquote point guard candidates.
Yeah, no question. But he's a local guy, and he, Compton Centennial, you got to root for guys from Compton, and 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 he doesn't have to make a multi-position switch. I mean, he's playing point guard for Nevada now. So
yeah, and certainly, I mean, the last Centennial guy in that situation has carved himself out a pretty damn good NBA career. Aaron Afalo, I think, is now with Orlando. So yeah, he's certainly a little bit different type players, but both, I think, the physical strength and the fact that they both are very, very focused, hardworking guys.
Right.
Certainly that'll play into his advantage.
So I'm gonna throw out two Pac-10 names. I still call them the Pac-10 because, as Scott pointed out on the show earlier in the week, it's the Pac-10
plus two.
Yeah. Plus mountains.
Plus some mountain teams that we're not sure really belong, but it's still the Pac-10 to me. Justin Cobbs from Cal, another local guy, Frank, Bishop Montgomery guy. Tell us about him. What's your insight into Justin Cobbs?
Well, I think the one thing about him is he's benefited by, when he started out at Minnesota, I think he played his freshman year at Minnesota for Tubby Smith, and then left there and went to Cal under Mike Montgomery and actually redshirted that year. So he's, in essence, I think this is his fifth year of college basketball, and I think that's definitely benefited him. Because, again, so many guys are, you hear guys, the pretty good players are almost considered failures if they're not in the NBA by their second or third year in college. He's a guy who I think has gotten incrementally better every season. And if he is going to have any opportunity to make an NBA roster or put himself in the position to ultimately make an NBA roster, he's going to need it. He needed every bit of savvy and physical conditioning and improvement you can make in a college setting. So he's done that. I get, he's not quite the athlete that Burton is, probably not quite as big and strong, but again, he's played for a very, very good coach, obviously, Mike Montgomery, who's in reality almost as good a coach as there is in college basketball. So I think that's helped because he demands a lot out of players at that position in terms of discipline and decision making and doing things the right way instead of just rolling out the ball and let the guy do his thing. So I think that all those things have helped him. And again, so much of it's going to depend on once league starts and what he does in the high-profile games with the Arizonas and the UCLAs and the Stanfords and people like that. And then if he's fortunate enough, obviously, so much of it these days for the non-lottery pick, non-surefire first-round pick, then it comes down to you get invited to Chicago in the pre-draft camp, and then once you do, what you're able to do there in that setting to impress the NBA people. But I could see him certainly maybe playing himself into Chicago pre-draft camp. Certainly I would think a guy that would go to, Portsmouth, the other big draft scenario where you actually get to play games. So much now is it's almost you really don't play games, you just do drills. Chicago pre-draft camp now is just strictly drills and testing. So some basketball players, you need to see him in a situation where he can show off his decision making, his skill for his position, his leadership, his toughness, his ability to play well under adversity, things like that.
Yeah, no question. Well, I wanted to get your insight on those kind of more local guys and throw them out there. Now, let's just talk really quickly. We don't have much time left about your scouting service. So if a Division I school wants your scouting service, they contact you.
Just they can hit me on my website or email me or whatnot. And then the thing is, again, because of the University of Oregon football controversy where they paid some guy from Texas $25,000 for what turned out to be a bogus scouting report, it was basically just a front to try to get some of the better high school football players from Texas. Or, then the NCAA really tightened down. There used to be, in the old Don Meade days, I remember Don would charge sliding scales. I mean, the upper tier programs would pay him, $300-400. And the lower income programs, the D2s, he'd charge them maybe $100. Well, you can't do that now. In the NCAA rules, you have to be certified if you're not certified, the NCAA schools can't buy your service. So if you're not certified, you're basically dead in the water. So there's a lot of parameters you have to be cleared by them. You have to, and the thing is, you have to charge everybody the same amount. So you have to kind of pick up an amount that as many schools as possible can afford it without charging it so cheap that you're working your ass off for very little money. So that's tough because obviously there's a lot of these lower income D1 programs can't afford to spend too much money on scouting services.
And that's the big rule change is that now everyone, you have to charge everyone the same amount, and it's to be honest, it really isn't fair because
it's not fair at all. It removes all capitalism from a professional business.
It's legislating everyone to do the same thing, and so Sacramento States and Cal State Fullertons don't have the budget oftentimes to buy a good scouting service like Frank's. And what happens is then you, Frank Burleson, who has this great service, can't sell it, Scott, to everybody because he can't undercut his own market.
Which is total BS because the NCAA is stepping out into private sector and telling people what they can do. And that really just encourages cheating, because there's nothing to stop people from sliding an envelope to somebody, and these services have to stay in business, and it's the NCAA's fault because they can't properly police their own programs.
Well, when you think about it, too, is you think about with the restrictions they're having now on live evaluations and live scouting. Again, now I think this spring it's gone from 2 weekends to just one. So you got basically one weekend you could go watch any spring events, and then you go and you've got the 3-4 day periods in July. You would think that how I cannot. What a great investment somebody like myself who's very, very diligent and tries to see everybody and give a real measured, honest, accurate portrayal of a player's potential. If somebody's doing that a good job, then whatever they pay me is kind of makes up for the fact that they can't actually see them themselves. So it's actually a good prudent financial decision to do it. But
it's a great it's a great value, Scott. That here Frank can go out every weekend and see all the games. And his service might be $800 for the year, $1,000, $500. It's like a one-time thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And you know how much it would cost the school to send their staff to these events?
Tens of thousands of dollars.
Repeatedly every weekend during the spring and the summer?
I think the scouting services should team up, and go with a class action against the NCAA, because it sounds like they're trying to regulate how you do your business.
Well, remember, what was the big assistant coaches thing where they did the class action suit and they ended up having to settle, and all those assistant coaches they said, well, you can't get full-time because you can only have 2 or 3 full-timers.
Yeah. It was the guys.
Limited earnings assistant.
Yeah.
And all those coaches were getting these giant paychecks for all the money that they had been deprived of when they were, they worked 80 hours and were getting basically paid for 16 hours or whatnot.
Right. Well, the NCAA is a scam, and they're already dealing with Ed O'Bannon and that class action suit because they were ripping off all the players or former players by using their likenesses into infinity, for what they were given, what these days amounts to 1 year of college, since most of the people that they're profiting off of don't even stay in school a second year, and then they force them to starve, and if they make a couple dollars, they threaten to throw them out of school, like Johnny Manziel last year or Maurice Claret.
Yeah, well, that's true.
It's bogus.
And so the NCAA, is going to be facing a major issue with the major football conference powers coming up soon. I mean,
great point. I mean, in reality, would it really surprise you, Mike, if 3 or 4 years from now, the NCAA as we currently know it is no longer in existence?
No, that's what they're talking about right now.
Yeah,
too.
I'm
looking forward to it.
And you said the key word that is the football powers, when there's basically
when they get it amongst themselves that they want to keep their money in house.
Yeah, why do they need to distribute it to all these other NCAA schools, because when you have an NCAA championship, it goes into the NCAA. It's like the NCAA tournament. People forget that NCAA men's basketball tournament. I think the figure's like 98.5% of the NCAA's operating revenue comes from the NCAA men's basketball tournament. And that's just, again, you understand why, because no other sport other than football and basketball makes any money. So with Title IX and things, the dollar for dollar expenditure on scholarships you have to do between male and female athletes, you need a sport like that to make it huge money, or basically we don't, and suddenly it's going to be the world's biggest intramural leagues.
Right. So the key thing is, 4 or 5 years from now, I'm not going to be surprised if the NCAA doesn't exist at all, or if they do.
What's going to happen, I could see, is, and again, the key football powers. Again, what would you estimate? There's basically 50 to 60 football programs, basically. The Southeastern, the Pac-12, the Big 12, the Big 10, and whatever the ACC or whatever configuration that is. And they play football on it's such a different level in terms of the money they spend, and basically they play each other, and when they play somebody outside that realm, it's just for a payday to give them the money to play them. So they're going to say, well, why should we split money with 300 other schools? Let's just keep all the money, negotiate our own contracts, and do our own thing and spend the money the way, establish our own set of rules, right. Be it recruiting, be it economic rules. And again, now what about the rest of the schools? And maybe the rest of the schools band together and form some new form of NCAA where they don't have the big time financial commitment to college football, and then it kind of has. The thing is, what happens to the NCAA tournament? Because I think one of the charms and lures that draws not only people going to the games and following it, but actually, watching it on TV and the advertising dollars and stuff, is the fact that it is, a pool from 365 teams, and there's 68 teams in the tournament, and the quote-unquote little guys can be the Cinderellas, where, let's face it, you can't do that in football. If you don't have $3 or $4 million budget for football, you're not going to compete. Whereas in basketball, you get a good coach, and you get the right 4 or 5 players and a couple of good blue-collar walk-ons and tough kids. You could almost get to the Final Four, which the George Masons of the world.
Davidson, George Mason,
but that's
exactly. And I think that's just that's the big lure, I think, of the NCAA tournament as much as the power schools. So I think the NCAA tournament, hopefully that stays an entity that close to what it is now. But football basically now is basically 30 or 40 programs anyway, just kind of, every once in a while a Central Florida sneaks in or something like that, but it's always, Alabama, Oregon these days, like that. So
my grandfather told me the NIT was a pretty good tournament too.
Exactly. And again, does the NCAA tournament eventually go the way that did? And maybe these BCS football programs say, you know what, we're going to have our own basketball tournament.
And boy, won't ABC Network be pissed.
We'll let our guys do pretty much just do whatever they want to do to get the best players, and people will want to see the highest quality athlete compete.
No question, Frank. So if you want to follow what Frank Burleson does, you can go to www.burlesononbasketball.com.
Or you can follow me on Twitter. I'm always great for some great basketball /political /movie entertainment comments. It's Frankie Burr, FRANKIE Burr, BUR.
Okay, and so that's on Twitter, and Twitter at Frankie Burr, FRANKIEBUR. BUR, Frankie Burr.
Yep.
So, Frank, it's been great having you on the show. We didn't get a chance to cover what you were doing in Phoenix this weekend, but we're out of time, and we've had a great time with you, and we'll get you back on the show down the road and catch up with you again.
Look forward to it, Mike. Thanks, guys. Great to visit with you.
Okay.
Great chatting. Have a great night.
Thanks a lot, Frank. So listen, Scott, before we sign out tonight, we've just got a couple of updates here and scores that we want to share. Greg Gilmore and his Pioneer High School Titans.
Great win tonight.
Road Warriors.
Great win tonight. They are playing in the finals tomorrow, okay, of a tournament, and they play at 7:30 against Bonita High School. They beat Montebello tonight 40-38. They're in the El Rancho tournament, Chris, and that's 7:30 at El Rancho High School, which is in Pico Rivera, right?
Right.
Okay, so I went and saw them play yesterday, and they played well, and I was excited to see O'Shea Williams play. He played hard. He fouled a little bit more than I think he should have, but he played really hard, and I liked what I saw. So we'll be giving some good wishes to Greg Gilmore and the Pioneer Titans tomorrow, and one more team to mention. The East Los Angeles College Huskies are playing in the finals tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Riverside City College. They made it to the championship game. They play Chaffee tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Special shout out to them tonight. They beat San Bernardino Valley College for the second time this year.
Way to go, Huskies.
82-76 in 2 overtimes. And point guard Marcus Romaine had 25 points for the East LA Huskies. So I'm excited for Coach Mosley and the Huskies. I'm excited for Coach Gilmore and the Pioneer Titans. 2 former players of mine. I'm excited for both of them. They're playing in championship games tomorrow, Scott. And you know what? The great thing about those championship games, Chris, the first one is at El Rancho High School in Pico Rivera. It's a 16-team tournament. Imagine that, getting to the finals. And the Riverside tournament, as I mentioned, 16-team tournament.
Always a tough one.
Getting to the finals. So special shout-outs to both programs.
Has ELAC ever won that tournament before?
No, never. And they've been great guests on our show. And Chris always likes to encourage the former guests to call in and give us an update. So hopefully, Chris, we'll get a big update on Tuesday from both of these programs and both these coaches.
And a shout out to the Pasadena Bulldogs, who are going to the Mission Prep tournament out in San Luis Obispo. So good luck to you guys next week.
And my Boston Celtics, who still lead the Atlantic Division.
Nice, with a losing record.
But they're winning.
Okay. Hey, this has been a great show. We've enjoyed having you listen to Time Out with Coach Miller. We'll see you on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Thanks for listening.
Have a good night, y'all.
16 made a dream with this basketball. Coach Miller on the court, and we going hard. Pass the rock to the paint. I give it my all, or be like Chris Paul, shoot the 3-point, y'all. Look, it's time out with Coach Miller. 14 straight conference championships, we winners. It don't stop from the bottom to the ceiling, cause all I know is win, and we winning. Full focus, we got a topic to discuss. High school, prep school, small colleges, yup. Another special guest today, listen up. It might get a little hectic from the stuff we discuss.